without further ado, what I'd like to do is to welcome Dr. Calvin Ball to the stage. He is the chair of our county council. Dr. Ball.
Good evening, everyone. As you know, those of you who know me, I'm a strong believer that our lives are journeys that are made up of many moments that shape who we are and who we become and the impact that we make to those around us. And I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, to share a couple of those moments in my life with you. One is when I was a teenager, I remember talking with someone very close to me, and I told them, one day, I think I might be someone important, someone like an elected official or a judge, and I might even have my doctorate. And that dear close friend told a teenage Calvin Ball, why don't you have more realistic goals? And while it's quite humorous now, and I'm very close with that friend, and we joke about it every so often, it hurt. It hurt a little at that moment. And while I turned that pain into motivation to move forward, it occurred to me many years later that they didn't mean any harm. They just had no role models to see that that was a possibility within either of our grasps. You see, neither one of us knew any elected officials. Neither one of us knew anyone who even had a master's degree, let alone a doctorate. And so when I came to Columbia and I worked hard and volunteered, and I remember when I became a councilman, it was a little surreal. And it did not become real until a particular day when I was traveling through one of my schools in my district. And this school was in Columbia, and it was an elementary school. And I was a newly minted council member and was walking with the principal and a few dignitaries, and there were some children behind us. And a little boy came up, and he could have been a Calvin Ball too. Little black boy, and he said, how you doing, Councilman Ball? And I said, how you doing? And I shook his hand, and he eased back about a foot, and he said to his friends, I just shook Councilman Ball's hand. And at that moment, not only did it become real that I was a council member, but it became real that for that little boy, maybe when he grows up, and he talks to his friends about what he can be, whether it's a councilman, a doctor, president of UMBC, or anything, he will not laugh, and his friends won't laugh. They'll be working on a plan. And to me, that is what Columbia is about. As we are marching toward 50, and we think about the values that are the bedrock of the society that we are building, the society in which we are growing the next generation of leaders, the next generation of those who will chart the course. Not only is diversity key, not only is inclusion key, but being those role models that everyone, whether you're black, white, Asian, Hispanic, you have a disability, whoever you are, there is not only a place in the society for you, but there's a place of excellence, a place of honor, and a place where you can be fulfilled. So for me, those moments made it so important to me to always remember that diversity does matter. Thank you.
Mr. Walker, who's president of the African American Community Roundtable, come up and greet us. Thank you very much.
Good evening. It is an honor on behalf of the African American Community Roundtable to co-sponsor this important dialogue on diversity. We're a collection of churches, fraternities, sororities, civic and nonprofit organizations who work together to build a better Howard County. Our founder, and I'm going to ask her to stand, Candace Dotson-Reed, please. Candace had a vision of creating a unified group to work together to build Howard County. And so she asked a collection of organizations, of African American organizations here in the county, to come together. And the goal is to work collaboratively to eliminate racial disparities affecting African Americans here in Columbia and throughout Howard County. In January of 2012, the African American Community Roundtable was born. We're grateful to Candace because her visionary leadership led to great things, and the results of which can be seen in the work that we do. We've held 4 public forums addressing educational issues such as the achievement gap, suspension disparities, and parent advocacy, each turning out hundreds of parents and community stakeholders. We will continue to be a forceful voice to address budget, policy, program, and systematic challenges affecting African American students, parents, and personnel in the Howard County Public School system. Our partnership with the Horizon Foundation came when the Horizon offered us a $150,000 grant to help educate the community on the Affordable Care Act and to encourage people to get signed up for health care enrollment plans. This partnership continued as we will help to always promote health and healthy choices and healthy lifestyles for African Americans in all of Howard County. We will continue to push for the increase of healthy food options in our public facilities. Our economic diversity and development team is working with local businesses and entrepreneurs to create greater economic opportunities here in the county. And our Public Safety Committee is working with the Howard County Police Department to support the improvement of public safety and awareness, increase opportunities for minorities in hiring, promotions, and leadership roles. And this fall, we're working on a public forum at the new Roby Training Center in Marriottsville, so we look forward to more information on that to come. But tonight, we join with the Columbia Association to address issues of diversity. The real beauty of Columbia, and indeed Howard County, is our diversity. To sustain this unique characteristic for the future generations, it's important for us to engage in courageous conversations, both as listeners and sharing. We are stewards of a great trust. So let the conversation begin and continue until every man, woman, boy, and girl is judged by the content of their color, of their character, not the color of their skin, not the neighborhood they live in, or who they love, or what God they serve. You see, we must pledge to build a stronger Howard County, a brighter future for all of Howard County, all of Maryland, one that will be the envy of the rest of America. Thank you for being here tonight. It's a privilege to be a co-sponsor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. I would like to acknowledge Jen Terrasa, I think, wanted to be here tonight, and her assistant is here, Kate McLeod. Is that correct? Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Milton Matthews, the president and CEO of Columbia Association, and he will be directly introducing Dr. Dabrowski. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Jane said, I'm Milton Matthews. I'm the president and CEO of the Columbia Association, and I've now been here for roughly 2 years. And it's, as I was saying earlier, it's been a great experience being a part of the Columbia community. On behalf of the CA Board of Directors and all of our team members, I would like to welcome you to another presentation of the Community Building Speaker Series. We're very pleased, as you've heard earlier, to be a partner with this particular presentation with the African American Community Roundtable of Howard County. And we're very pleased to have, as our speaker this evening, Dr. Freeman A. Dabrowski III. Dr. Dabrowski will be, as you heard earlier, covering the topic of diversity matters. Columbia is a wonderful example of the results of a deliberate plan from day one to develop a community for all to enjoy. Diversity mattered to those individuals who moved to Columbia in the community's early days. It mattered to the children who grew up here, and it matters to all of us today. During Columbia's early days, it was expected that developers and their sales associates understand that the community was truly to be an open city. In the words of Mr. James Rouse, we are to be colorblind. Following Columbia's early days, there were many years when CA's strategic plan referenced a living vision of an integrated community. Today, Columbia has expanded to include a wide spectrum of people from all around the world. And importantly, also today, Columbia is still one of the few racially diverse and integrated communities in the Baltimore region. This evening, who better to talk about thriving in our diverse community than Dr. Dabrowski? He's a child leader in the civil rights movement. Dr. Dabrowski has served as president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County since 1992. His research and publications focus on science and math education with special emphasis on minority participation and performance. Dr. Dabrowski has been honored with many awards as a college president, leader, educator, and writer. A copy of Dr. Dabrowski's book, Holding Fast to Dreams, as you heard, will be available after this event. Named as one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report and one of the 100 most influential people in the world by the Time magazine, Dr. Dabrowski is sure to inspire us as we think about the value of diversity in Columbia. Everyone, let's please welcome Dr. Dabrowski.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate this. Thank you very much. I'm going to come out there in a little while, but I'm going to start from back here and read something to you. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, I am really delighted to have as one of my senior leaders at UMBC right now, somebody called her CDR, Carolyn Candace Reed. Stand up again. Candace is one of my senior leaders at UMBC now. I'm very proud of her. We were able somehow to pull her from her vice presidency at the Greater Baltimore Committee. And for my colleagues, and there's several in the room, she was an English major at UMBC. Very pleased of that. Give the humanities a round of applause. We're very proud. Speaking of diversity, and then went on to Georgetown Business, but I'm delighted that she is back now working very closely with me and other senior leaders. Secondly, it's interesting that someone who helped to build UMBC's strength with NASA, we're one of the leading research institutions in the country with NASA, in the top 20, in fact, and Franco is here. Franco Rinaldi, where are you? I saw Franco stand. Franco really did build the research. He was over the Earth Systems Directorate at NASA, he and his wife, and talking about diversity, and the Italians come in to help the Americans out from years back. Diversity of all types. I'm very proud of that. And then finally, I'm going to surprise somebody and read before I get into talking about broad diversity and my book and some of the issues that you have addressed and are thinking about. I want to read from a colleague's work, he will recognize his work. So he should know from the beginning, I'm not plagiarizing. I would eventually say whom I'm referring to whom I am referring. But when we think about diversity, he says, as a crucial aspect of society, it might help to compare it to the role of genetic diversity in evolution. Now, people who are afraid of science, who don't know science, get really uncomfortable when you say anything about genetics. And yet we as Americans have to learn to be far broader, much broader in our thinking about appreciating what we learn from nature and from science. So listen to this for a minute. By comparing it to the world of genetic diversity and evolution, it's well established in conservation biology that species otherwise seemingly similar in phenotype can vary in their genetic diversity. And those with the greater genetic diversity have selected advantages over the others, especially in the face of changing environments, well documented. The consequences of genetic diversity in competitive communities can be seen as we look through a number of journals. And in the face of drastic environmental changes, populations with greater genetic diversity are more likely to survive. A wider range of variations makes a population more viable under changing contingencies. This advantage of diversity or variations also exists at the level of cultures. Those cultures that resist diversity may be successful in the short term, but to the extent that they produce stereotyped practices and discourage creativity, they will not last in the long run. Think of that as context for my talking today. And so that I will not be considered somebody who plagiarizes, the person who wrote that is Charlie Catania, a retired professor of psychology from UMBC. Stand up, Charlie. Give him a round of applause. It just so happens that by chance, Charlie, he and his wife live here in Howard County, and he was talking with me about this village in Howard that he is a part of, this nonprofit virtual community involving people over 55 years old. And it's a fascinating virtual community in that they are supporting each other, people who like to age in place, as they say. And he's got materials for you if you're interested. He has no shame. He's typical UMBC professor. He has no shame. But what he said, and this was before we even got to something about this, was that he wants to see greater diversity, racial diversity, diversity of all types, because they are looking at this aging process and ways in which people over 55 can be helpful, quite frankly, to other people. At UMBC, we have been discussing and looking at something called the Wisdom Institute. Everybody retires and people will say to you when you retire, oh, it's a shame we don't have all that wisdom that you have somewhere. But nobody does anything about it. But the idea of looking at ways of harnessing the energy, the intellectual energy, and the experiences of a group that could be considered and should be considered, one of the aspects of diversity is very important. Because people who are over 55, I can tell you that now, think differently from people who are under 30. Do you agree with me? It really is very different. And both are important. Both are important. And so I get to the topic tonight. It's starting with some thinking about, even as broad as genetic diversity, thinking about age diversity. The world is so different from 50 years ago when Columbia was founded. Columbia and UMBC have so much in common. Our campus is in the process of celebrating its 50th anniversary right now. And our commencement speaker this year will be the president of Harvard. Why? Because we have so many students who have graduated from Harvard. And, can you hear me? Can you still hear me? Can you hear me? Are you okay? And we were really proud this year that one of our own PhDs just earned tenure in biochemistry at the Harvard Medical School. Give her a big hand. Big round of applause. Here is the message of tonight. The way we think about ourselves, the language that we use, the way we interact with each other, the values that we hold, the manner in which we treat each other will really determine not only who we are today, but who we will be in the future. When this area of the country was founded, Columbia in Howard County, a county with rich history in many ways, when my campus was founded, the world was very different in many ways. In 1963, Maryland decided it needed another university in the Baltimore area that could produce students. First thing they said was, first of all, who would have the preparation to go on to become physicians and lawyers at UMB. Other institutions in Baltimore were teacher training institutions. College Park was considered heavily a Washington institution. And the question was, how do we develop an institution that can produce students at a certain level and also have the quality of science and arts and humanities that could work closely with the downtown campuses and help to build the economy, because they could see that Baltimore needed as much of a burst of energy, of intellectual energy as possible. Now, that was in the early 60s, and the legislature approved the founding of our campus. And the first students came in September of 1966. So we are parallel to Columbia. And from the beginning, we were known as the only university in this state in which students of all races could enter. Every other university in the early 60s, and all the way back 100 plus years, had been founded either for whites or for blacks. And there was no in between. And interestingly enough, you had a few who had been protesting to get into one institution or another, and the world thought in those terms, black and white. My book begins at that same period, somehow prophetically. In 1963, I was 12. I was sitting in the back of church, not wanting to be there. What child wants to be at church in the middle of the week? And my parents had bribed me, I've told this story so many times, with two things. The two things I loved most: food and math. So I was eating my M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, and during my math, and there was this guy at the lectern talking, and he said this: if the children participate in this peaceful march, all of America will understand that even our babies, our young people, know the difference between right and wrong, and that they want a good education. And all I could think about, the one thing that I could think about, and that famous PhD who was a councilman said this, it's very interesting, the one who said he wanted to be a doctor even when he was 12 or 13 years old, was that I was tired of those hand-me-down books in my school. We had to get the books after the white kids had used them for years. It was awful. And my parents were not allowed to buy my books because then I'd be different from everybody else. So you used hand-me-down books. And it was a symbol that we were considered second class. It was an awful thing for the psychologists in the room to do to children. And so I said, who is that guy? And of course his name was Dr. Martin Luther King. And I went home and said to my parents, I've got to go. I want to do this. And they said, absolutely not. And I was stunned. I said, you told me to go, I went. You told me to listen, and I did. And now I want to do what he wants me to do, and you don't want me to do it. And we had this big argument, and finally they just said to me, you guys are hypocrites. For anybody young in the room, at that time you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. They said, go to your room. That was the kiss of death. Go to your room, right? I knew I was in trouble. They came in the next morning. They had not slept. They prayed all night. They literally came in, and I had never seen my parents at the end of crying. They had been crying. It was just really scary. And I said, what's wrong? And they said, it wasn't that we didn't trust you. We did not trust the people who would be over you, because if you march, you're going to go to jail. And I still hadn't really figured it out because and I had skipped some grades. So I was more mature, and my parents were older, and I was 12, but I was going to the 10th grade. So I was younger than most people in my grade. But it was the end of my 9th grade year. I was about to be promoted, and I said, I've got to go. And my students at UMBC have said over the years, you must have been really brave. I was not a brave child. Let me make that very clear. The only thing I'd ever attacked in my life was a math problem. Did you get that? If a fight broke out, I was running the other way, Franco. I was not a brave child. I was a fat little nerdy kid. You get it? All right? Get the picture here. Get the picture. There's nothing noble about this, all right? The only point was I wanted a better education. So, all right, we go and we march, and it was awful. And if you've seen the Four Little Girls piece with Spike Lee, the police chief, Bull Connor, spat in my face. He said, "What do you want, little Negro?" And I said, all we wanted to do was kneel and pray for our freedom to go to better schools. That was the essence. But because we didn't have a permit to march, they had the right to throw us into jail. And he literally and just spat in my face, picked me up and threw me into the police wagon. And we spent a horrible week there, a terrible week there. Now, what did the experience teach? It taught that even children can be empowered to take some ownership of their lives. They can take actions that can help shape who they will be in the future. It taught us that even in adversity, when we were treated worse than animals in that jail, that we could pull together and give each other support. And there were children much younger than I, less mature, that I was supporting. And it taught me that I could rise above my own fears and help others. Why do I go into that with students? Because if people don't know the stories, they're doomed to repeat the mistakes. And the world was so different at that time. A few marches after that, we saw legislation that made such a difference. The worst experience of all for me, of all of that, was not the jail, though. It was that my little friends, the little girls who were killed in the church. Imagine 4 little girls, all in white, primping in the mirror in the basement between Sunday school and church, not knowing that the bomb was there right behind the commode. Imagine children growing up remembering the hand with the ring that my friend's father had given her. So we had nightmares for years. I don't tell you that for someone to feel sorry for us. I tell you that because it is the horrors of hatred. It is the horrors of hatred. And someone I got to know, white, who never gave up on the idea that we could find the people who did that, really did work to do just that. And the only time, being in this setting, I can really say this, the only time I ever saw whites in my church, first time I realized that a white person, quite frankly, could care about a black, was when I saw whites of all races at the funeral of these 3 of the 4 girls, the coffins that I'll never forget, with the smallest in the middle. And you saw rabbis and priests and Muslims, you saw every faith. And you saw whites, and I saw white adults crying for black children. And it said to me, when I talked to my parents about it, that people of any race can have decent hearts and can care, and that we care about our children. Shortly after that, the legislation, quickly on, because it's so important in thinking about diversity, it was only after that 64, without the 1964 Civil Rights Act, many of you here would not be sitting here. We certainly wouldn't be sitting here together this way. And the 1965 Act, Higher Education Act. What percent at that period, in 1965, 66, when my college was founded, when Columbia was founded, what percent of Americans do you think had a college degree? Take a guess. I heard 25, I heard 5. Anybody else? It was 10% of Americans held college degrees. So people who are my age and older who went to college didn't realize how small the numbers were of people who had gone to college. You get my point? 10%. Now, here's the other part. At that time, we only talked about 2 groups. If you're old enough to remember this, black and white. Black and white, right? So what percent of whites had a college degree? I heard 80. You think a lot of white people. That's interesting. That's a joke, folks. That was a joke. That was a joke, folks. You got to put some humor into this thing. He said 80% of white people. I said, you must think a lot of white people. Wait a minute. That's a joke. That's a joke. All right? Got to put some humor into this stuff. So the way you get through it. All right? All right, what percent? It was 11%. Only 11%. What percent of blacks? 2 to 3, mainly graduates of some of the HBCUs. Okay? All right. Now, to put this in perspective, how many of you remember when TV was only black and white? Oh, you know, y'all are old group. When I say that to my students, they say, how many of you have had color TV all your lives? Raise your hands. Look how proud they are. Look how proud they are. You know you're proud. My students always say, no, Doc, it was never, no, TV has always been in color. No. It was black and white. Americans wouldn't believe the percentage of Americans who had not been born in '63. What percent of Americans living today do you think were not even in the world yet in 1963? 38%, anybody else?
65 or 70.
2/3 of Americans had not even been born. Now, for those of us who are older, even the president was 2. All right? Why am I saying this? And so when I was talking to some of the wonderful young people, they would say, well, what difference does that make? And I said this. How many of you remember where you were when you first realized 9/11 had happened? When you saw those, right? How many of you remember how you felt when you saw that, right? Then I say this. When you have children, do you think they will feel the same way you did? No, because they weren't there. It's like those of us who remember when John Kennedy was killed or when Martin King was killed. If you were not there, if you were not in the world, you don't have that same gut feeling. And what am I saying about diversity? I'm saying that much of our perspective is shaped by our childhood experiences, by what not only we read, but what we experience ourselves. If you've not had the experience of going to the door and people looking at you like you better not come in here, you just don't know what that feels like. If you've not been a woman who's been in a room where people expect you not to be there in gender, right, or in race, or a Jew, because no Jews allowed or whatever, you don't know that gut feeling. You've read it and it may upset you, but your own experiences shape for each of us, to some extent, the way we see the world. They just do. It doesn't mean we can't relate to people, empathize, and the generations will change depending on the experiences, where they were, what part of society, all those kinds of factors. Now, with that said, here's the point. So you put it all together, in the 60s, literally, only about 10% with a college degree, 90%, if you think about it, for all practical purposes, of whites, and 98% of blacks did not have a college degree. Higher Education Act came in '65. What did it do? It said you don't have to be with money to go to college. We can give you financial aid. And so what people had seen in New York at City College, where you had so many brilliant people who, first generation Americans who went there for little or nothing, and went on and got the Nobel Prize, Brooklyn College, places like that. All of a sudden around the country, people began to say, well, I want my kid to go to college. I want my kid to go to college. So when UMBC is founded, I want my kids to go to college, right? And all of a sudden, more people began to go. I talked about this in Georgia, and people were somewhat uncomfortable when I said, if it hadn't been for the civil rights movement, America would be so different today. And a white gentleman got up and said, Freeman, may I make a statement? And he said, I am the head of my school board for my city, and I am the CEO of the biggest company in my town, and people know I'm rich, and I'm obviously a white man. He said, for people assume that I came from money. He said, nothing could be further from the truth. He said, my dad had died, my mother was a sharecropper. And he said, but she saw the little Negro children getting some financial aid to go to college, and she said, I want my children to go too. And she got somebody to help her fill out the financial aid forms. And my sister and I were able to go to college. And because of that, I moved up, and here we are now, very advanced Americans. He said, so when you hear somebody talking about the civil rights movement, don't you dare think it just helped one group, blacks or Hispanics or women. It helped all of Americans. So let me ask you right now to give the civil rights movement a round of applause. question. How many of you in this room are either the first in your family or first generation to go to college? Let me see your hands. Look around the room. It's a powerful story, and you all are really advantaged because you got at least 30-40% who are not, which is really saying, as you would expect, because Howard County, this is what I always say when I come, bro, when I come to your county, I say this: what should we expect of the richest county in the richest state in the richest country in the world? That's who you are. Think about it. I don't say that disparagingly. I am in awe of what's possible here. You have the best educated people in the world, Americans. Because today the fact is that we've gotten up to what percent of Americans with a college degree? What do you think? I heard 60, I heard 45, anybody else? 73? Believe it or not, Americans have finally gotten to 30% with a college degree, over 25. Now, my friends of every race will say, Freeman, that couldn't be true. Everybody I know has a college degree. Doctors know doctors, lawyers know lawyers, scientists know scientists, right? Accountants know accountants, professors know professors. You know people who work with you, right? But plumbers who make more money than a lot of y'all know plumbers, all right? And they have good jobs, all right? And they didn't have to go to college to get them. And it's important to say that there's some good jobs without getting a college degree. So I am not putting anybody, I'm saying it depends on what you want to do and your skills, but I am saying that we make assumptions. Or, we will say in our heart, we're most Americans. No. 2/3 of kids who start college today come from families where nobody's ever gone to college before. Now, what's the difference? For whites, it's about 38% of Americans, whites, are college educated. For blacks, it's closer to 18-19%. For Hispanics, it's even worse. It's only about 15%. The fastest growing group in all. The Asian population, what do you think it is?
100.
Oh my God, I never heard 100 before. I never heard 100 before, you got me that time. I heard 90 before to my Asian. And your NBC is about 25% of Asian descent. We're very fortunate. From all places, China, India, Singapore, but it is 55%. One of the reasons is that large numbers of people come here to go to grad school. And this region, you're going into the national agencies and the physicians and the lawyers, it's a wonderful story. It really is, okay? Now, that is the picture. So we're saying, essentially, I'm telling you all this because education is related to income, is related to all the ways in which we can talk about diversity. So we can talk about it, and I want to talk some about race because that's the one that's least comfortable for people in America to talk about today, race. We can talk about gender, we can talk about income level, which is a big challenge, income inequality in America. If you've read some of the Nobel laureates, recently the Stigler book, for example, or if you read the very cocky French guy Piketty, who actually is able to actually be rather condescending towards MIT economists. I think that is so great that he takes them on. So he's a mathematical economist, all talking about this growing inequality, the exponential growth of very wealthy people. So income, and then you can talk, quite frankly, about sexual orientation. We can talk about diversity of thought. All these are areas. We can talk about disabilities that people have. The American Indians are the least advantaged in our society. They are. We need to say that. And the fact is that their percentage with a college degree is well below 15%. I work with some of the Native American universities, and they're working in that and working to get more Native Americans into science. Real challenges that we face. But here is the point. As we talk about these areas and some guiding principles that we at UMBC have thought about. Number one, how to allow people to say what they really think without believing always that they have to be politically correct. There's a sensitive point there. But if you appreciate philosophy, and the great philosopher who said, the unexamined mind is not, or the unexamined life is not worth living. That if we can't examine our values and understand why we feel what we feel, how can we ever hope to grow? That there must be some settings in which people can say what they think calmly and have people listen to it, analyze it, look at it from different perspectives. Number two, it was I. Rabi, the Nobel laureate, who said when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' mothers would ask them the question at the end of the day, what did you learn in school today? But this physicist said that his mother, in contrast, his Jewish mother, he said, would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? I love that. And he said, the practice of encouraging his curiosity made him the thinker he became. We need to be able to encourage an environment in which people ask good questions. And then third, what I say in all of my speeches is we have to be willing to get beyond our comfort zone, to hear things we may not like, to be able to examine them and think about them, and sometimes leave and not have answers, but to be able to reflect. We in America have a culture that focuses on immediate gratification. And we think the answer should just be like that. But we do not solve a problem involving income inequality or academic achievements or health disparities or racial bias like that. It takes time and effort to understand the problems and to begin making progress. And what gives me hope is that I've seen my own campus, which is not perfect, but is a model of inclusive excellence, work with students from over 140 countries and with students from domestic diversity. So international diversity and domestic diversity, and encourage and support students and faculty and staff talking across different boundaries to understand each other's perspectives. I would argue today that while we have desegregated our institutions, whether they're universities or school systems, in some cases, we've desegregated. In other cases, it's hyper-segregation, as you know. The question we have to ask is, how much progress have we made in helping people from different backgrounds to understand the perspectives of people from other backgrounds? This is the question I'm constantly asking on my campus, because I know we've made a lot of progress, but I also know we have a long way to go. I'll say something that will upset some of you. We all talk about Congress because of what it's not able to do. Well, if you go back and you read Master of the Senate and Lyndon Johnson, for example, you'll find that Congress didn't get much done then either. John Kennedy, as much as we love his idea of John Kennedy, it was that Southerner, Lyndon Johnson, who got some things done because he knew how to work with the people from the South. All right? To finally get people to give in something, get the Civil Rights Act passed. It took a Southerner to break the barriers of those of you old enough to get to the point. And we were all, you talk about different periods. My mother and father voted differently in the race for president because my father didn't trust the Southerner. You get that? All right. And my mother said, no, he's an odd man, but I believe he'll have the right to do the right thing. But then you had usually you had a same household, middle-class black family. You got a mother and a father. I'm listening to them talk about both candidates, right? Richard Nixon, John Kennedy, and about that, right? And my dad had said, what happens if something happens to John Kennedy, since, quite frankly, he is somebody. First of all, it's hard for us to think about people not being supportive just because somebody's Catholic, right? I mean, that alone is so, just you think about how biased people were based on his Catholicism. You get my point? And then the fact that he was being supportive of something involving race and about black children or something. My father was afraid that he might get killed. And he said, what's gonna happen to us if that Southerner gets in? And it turned out that the Southerner did the right thing. You get my point? Very important to say that, because if that had not happened, I'm telling you, who knows if we'd be sitting here today. Now, here's the point that I want to make. My students ask this question when thinking about race. We have a president of the country who is black, which many of us thought would never happen. He has made, I think, many of us think, has made some progress in some areas. I'm sorry, did I drop it? Oh, he has made progress in a number of areas. I get to be around him, and I'm so proud of much of what he's done and his dignity with which he acts. He is a man of integrity. And at the same time, anyone who says race doesn't matter. Hasn't looked at what we see in our cities, or hasn't looked at the statistics, the quantitative data. And I get all of the quantitative data. I'll give you one data point. My research, my life has been spent thinking about how we can produce more scientists of all races, men and women. Not one national agency in America can tell me that even 1% of the scientists, research scientists, are black. Not one national agency. The one you might think about, and there are some good people at all these agencies, it's not that. We're talking about structural challenges and the need for a certain level of commitment. NIH is the one we would all think about because of health disparities. When you talk, we had one of the biggest achievements of my campus occurred yesterday. Someone who's on the cover of my book. This book has 3 people. It's called Holding Fast to Dreams, from the Langston Hughes poem, Hold Fast to Dreams. And then it's empowering youth from the civil rights movement to STEM achievement. What did I learn during that period of going to jail and being in a middle-class neighborhood about everything from faith to hard work to really having a vision of what you wanted to be? What did I learn that helped me in working with colleagues to help more students succeed? Building community, critical, high expectations, hard work. Grit is the word we use. Our dog, the Chesapeake Bay Retriever, is true grit. We're very proud of that. I'm getting to get away from the idea he's smart and she's smart. I got kids at UMBC who are preteen that we get through the calculus sequence before they're 13. Okay? But and because sometimes children need more rigor than a regular school can provide. So the set of talented youth, right? But here's the point. These children whom I work with are some of the hardest workers I've ever known. It's not like it's just all natural. We get this impression, it's just natural. No, any great scientist is going to tell you, you have passion for the work, and you work. You've got talent, yes, but you work. It's the grit, the resilience, the perseverance, never giving up that can make the difference. Anybody in here who succeeded knows, I don't care what you're given naturally, you take it and you work with it. And yet we give people the impression, you have it or you don't. And so the point I want to make that's such a wonderful statement is Mike Summers I put on the cover to make the point. People wanted me to put all blacks on the cover. And I said, no. The dream is that people of all races will learn the skills they need and have the trust among each other to solve the problems of humankind. What looks like artwork is actually HIV. This is AIDS. This is HIV on the cover because this scientist, who's a Howard Hughes investigator, studies HIV. He's actually determined 2 parts of the structure leading to drugs that keep people alive. Big deal. Give him a round of applause. But talking about what's uncomfortable when I go to some places is, I say I also put Mike on the cover because the power in science is still primarily in the hands of white men. Go to the National Academy of Sciences. We know that. It's not women. It's not people. And I'm not saying that disparagingly. I'm saying it as truth. You get my point? And I'm also saying this is one of the best human beings I know who has produced large numbers of kids of all races who've gone on to get PhDs in biochemistry. It was one of his doctoral students who now has tenure at Harvard. And yesterday, he was elected to the National Academy of Sciences. Give him a big round of applause. Now, why am I telling you that? Because I'm saying we must speak about the issues. Well, it is the underrepresentation of people in certain disciplines. We must talk about the critical challenge of why students are not doing well. And we need to look, whether it's race or whether it's about, I was talking to one of my future students about the fact that for women, the bigger challenge is not the math and science, because they're doing better in those areas, it's engineering and particularly computers. If you want to know, 30 years ago, we had gotten up to about 1/3 of all computer science majors in America being women in our colleges. Almost 40%, okay? We're down now below 20%. When I speak at the hackathons, if there are 100 kids there, I am amazed if there are 3 women out of 100, for high school or college. And when I ask the guys, what's wrong with this picture? You know what they said? Nothing, we're great. And when I said, well, what about, and by the way, and you don't see more than 1 or 2 blacks. one or two Hispanics, right? And you know what they'll say? Oh, those groups just aren't good with coding. Because if you've not seen people do something, you just assume they can't do it. So the best program we had this summer coming out of NSA was a program for girls of all races focused on mind, body, and spirit. It was coding and yoga. Coding and yoga. And let me tell you, it was powerful. So, because it taught them assertiveness. You get my point? While teaching them confidence and coding. So whether talking about gender or race, the question is, what are the kinds of programs at every level? And what I would say to you in Howard County is this, because I want to really get to questions. In some ways, you're the envy of the country because your scores are so high. But in other ways, when you disaggregate the data, you look at your African American and Latino scores, and then disaggregate a bit further. This is going to really be sensitive. Those whose parents are not from other countries will be at the bottom. Now, let me say something that you need to understand educationally. When I go to the most prestigious universities in this country, whether it's MIT or others, the largest percent of undergrads have parents of all races, heavily Asian, from other countries. The students who do the best in America in STEM areas invariably, often, come from other countries. And we are delighted they're here because they bring great strength. Give people who come from other countries a round of applause. Please, give them a round of applause. Because as my students would say, we are not haters in this room, all right? We're not being haters here. I am simply giving you the truth. And I'm saying we need to learn and be inspired. I give you this final story, and I'm going to just take the questions. I was having a focus group some years ago with students from other countries and from America. And I have high-achieving kids of all types who would make perfect math scores. You can do that when you're 14 or 15. That's not the big deal. These are really high-achieving kids. And I asked them about their study habits. Okay? And the fact is that the kids from other countries whose parents had come, and they had come over here when they were 12 and 13, were the hardest workers. They just were. Every time. And finally I said, what's the pattern here? And people mentioned it, and I said, why? And amazingly, a young woman from Jamaica got up and she said, I don't mean to insult my American children. And so it's like the icing on the cake. She said that, but for me, my education is the very bread of life. Because if I don't excel, my younger brothers and sisters may not eat. And she just had tears saying, nothing in my life is more important than this education. And my students were stunned by the gravitas at that moment there. It was just so powerful. And I thought to myself, we do have biases in our society. We do get upset when people say things that may be racist or prejudiced. And we do need to address those things. I don't have any problem with that. We do that here at BC. But what concerns me about our children from low-income backgrounds and Black and Hispanic children, but children of all races who are the bottom of that last 40%, because that bottom 35, 40% are not graduating from college. It's not happening from any race. Without a lot of intervention, I'm saying, is that we as a society must be as demanding of ourselves when thinking about how we help these children, both with their academic skills and with their sense of self. Because as I say to my students, sometimes when they come from a company, they say, well, he was a little prejudiced or he was a little rude. I'm saying, welcome to life. To the women sometimes, I'm having to say, toughen up, because you're going to find, whether it's a woman or black, or you're going to find some people who are wonderful and others who are not. And we gotta be ready to deal with it. When I was in summer school in Massachusetts, so I could learn what it was like to be with white kids. Okay? I'll never forget, nobody would speak to me. And not even the teacher would speak to me. And she'd look right through me. I came to understand Ralph Ellison's word, Invisible Man. And I felt so bad. And I would call home, and my mother and father, my father would defer to my mother, and my mother would say, well, tell me this. What do you think about the work in the math? And I say, it's really good, it's rigorous, it's hard. What about in the literature course? We own Dostoevsky, it was great, good stuff, it was really hard. She said, so you do know you're getting a better education than any little black kid in Birmingham, right? I said, yeah, but these people are not nice to me. She said, son, let me tell you something. We did not send you there to be liked. And if we didn't prepare you for this, the world often will not be fair. Now, there are times when you can speak up and do something about it, and you should. But she said something to me that almost knocked my wit out of me. She says, you know I love you, right? I said, yeah. My daddy said, she said, suck it up. She said, suck it up. Give my mama a round of applause. Suck it up. What did I say? People get upset when I say this, but I remember this. Later on, she tells me she got the phone and cried like a baby herself. She was so hurt they treated her child like that, but she had to toughen me up. You get my point? She knew I was in the mouth of a lion. And I needed to be tough enough not to get so hurt that I wouldn't get my work done. And she also was saying, do not let other people define who you are, whether you're a woman or black or whatever, because there will be people looking at you as if they think you are inferior. But you cannot let that define who you are. That was her point. And when I'm talking to my students, when young women, I'm saying, when you go into these labs, sometimes the guys can be really tough. You gotta be ready to be tough. And not show blood, because if you do, they're gonna say you're weak, and you're not gonna get it. You gotta be able to be tough. Now, at the same time, yes, when we can improve things, when we can sensitize things and people, we should do that. Of course we should. We should speak up and tell the truth. But what I want us to think about is, when do we spend most of our time and effort? When my students see a bad word, when somebody uses the N-word on the door, all right, or they send some email that's very inciting and that really upsets you, you know what I say to my students? You know, sometimes I think people do this kind of thing just so they can keep you out of class. What you think about it? Because you see, if somebody's really with a bad heart or mean spirit or something, all they got to do is say the wrong thing on my campus. Blank in, go home, right? And then it falls around, it gets viral, and all of a sudden protest. You can't find out who it is. And then the students are all upset. They're not focused on the work, and I'm saying, don't let people manipulate you. If we need to speak out and say this is wrong, yes. We will not tolerate that, yes. But at the same time, I want my students not to be manipulated by people. Do you get my point? Yeah. It's so important, because those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. Y'all need to write that down. Do you hear me? Once you get angry, then you're doing all kinds of stuff, and you can't think, you can't study, you can't do anything. You need to consider the source. That's for any situation, because we have those cases on our campus all the time. There's always, if you got 14,000 students, even if just 1% of them are prejudiced of any kind, right? You're talking about hundreds of things being said that can upset people. What am I saying? We're in a sensitive time in our country. We must teach our students and ourselves to understand those values that are most important. We must teach our students that there will always be times, whoever you are, when somebody is not fair to you. That wisdom means you decide when you take on the battle and when you just keep on working. Depends on the situation. Everybody who's successful knows exactly what I'm saying. Sometimes you can take the battle on and you can win. Other times you take the battle on and you lose. But most important, in this community, the question is, who are you? And what are your values? And given that you are so privileged as a community to have so much more than most of the world, how can you make sure that those children, both with income challenges and in these different categories, whether it's black or Hispanic, or young girls in technology, that we're doing things to give them the sense of self and the skills they need, the reading, the math, and critical thinking skills, by teaching them you learn to do by doing, so that as they confront the adversity, and they will, and when they're knocked down, they will get back up. It's the resilience for anybody in this room that has made the difference. I challenge you to watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. I tell my students, your character has everything to do with who you are, not only when people can see you, but what will you do when you know that your mama's looking. So thoughts become words, words become actions, actions become habits, habits become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, dreams, and values. Howard County, Columbia, you are so special, and you can be even better. Thank you all. Challenge me, please. Sometimes I'll take the questions myself. Challenge me and ask me anything you want. Yes.
Yeah, I teach advanced computer science in one of the high schools in this area. And what we find in the introductory level, we get about half of the students are girls.
Okay.
The intermediate level, that's down to 20%. And then at the advanced level, that's down to 10% or less. And that frustrates me because I would like to see.
Yes.
But isn't that they're being frightened away from the field because they are taking the introductory?
Yeah. Here is the difference. Our culture. I was talking with a brilliant young Indian woman here tonight. Is she still here?
Hi.
Stand up. Give her a hand. She's gonna be your UMBC student. Stand up. Let me see. Give her a hand. Stand up. And she's thinking about engineering, and between engineering, medicine, those areas, STEM, and she's going to be fine. But I was talking about computing, and I made a comment to her to upset her on purpose. I was being really provocative, all right? And what I said was this, that, and I do get this from some of my young women students from India, that they find that their American cousins here, even advantaged cousins here from Montgomery County, Howard County, women tend to say they don't like computing. Now, in India, women like computing. Large numbers of women come here fantastically prepared in computing. And so what happens is that the culture in America, without even our realizing it, discourages girls of all races from becoming involved in coding at an early age. The boys are involved in coding at a very early age. The games, what they see, what's cool, all involves boys. And so even when the young women who can do well eventually in differential equations or in chemistry, they've not been in that culture, and we've not come up with enough games and ways of getting little girls well before they get to you. So they have an orientation to it, regardless of how good the first teacher is. You get my point? That's why NSA decided, Toya Pearson is one of our PhDs and who senior woman at NSA said we've got to start earlier to give girls the advantage because the boys intimidate them. The boys intimidate them. And we as Americans have not seen that as unacceptable yet. That's what I'm saying. We have not, and the same thing, we don't help children of color to get into coding. Now, why is that important? Because so many of the jobs that are going to be available will require these technology skills. We're leaving people, big groups of people, women and people of color behind if we don't get them into this field. And believe it or not, this is what I was saying to my future student. You don't even have to major in computer science. I have students who major in English, philosophy, history. They take a few courses in information systems. They get great jobs in computing. They know how to learn. And they sometimes are more impressive than my techies, as I call them, because they can talk standard English. Right? And they can interact with people to make them feel comfortable. You get my point? So I can point to CIO. The CIO of the Council of Foundations majored in imaging and digital art at UMBC. You get my point? Art and technology. The CIO of American Council of Education, Information Systems. So, and what I'm saying though is we have to start earlier and we have to look at the culture. As it's very interesting, the book, The Geography of Bliss, says culture is the sea we swim in. Think about that. Culture is the sea we swim in. And the only way we really begin to understand the impact of culture is you have to get out of the water and look back at it. And when you get out of the water, you see how the boys have had advantages from ages 6, 7, and 8. And they intimidate girls. Because the girls have shown in math and in some of the life sciences, obviously they're superior. They're wonderful. They just haven't had the advantage in those early years. So girls and coding and yoga, think about it for Howard County. Think about it for Howard County. Next question.
Dr. Hrabowski, we have a question over here.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Hrabowski. My name is Joe Edwards. I was a graduate UMBC 2010. It's very good to see you. I actually live about a mile away, so I was very happy to see that you were coming. I'm a mobile program manager now in the government, and to your point about girls and coding, I'm seeing it firsthand. We have a national team of developers, and they're all wonderful, and we've been able to build a lot of great products. But the vast majority of the developers look a certain way. You mentioned the yoga.
I think that meant he was saying they were white guys, but he wasn't white guys. See how we got Kirk was a certain way.
Yeah, like I mentioned, the federal government, so I'm trying to be.
Excuse me, many of my best friends are white men, so let's just say it, all right? Frank, you are my best friends. Charlie, you put humor into it, you can say anything, all right? Come on.
Very good point. I was just wondering if you've seen any other interventions alongside things like yoga that have helped maybe communities that typically don't go into coding, help them to move into it.
You know, we have a CWIT Scholars Program, the Center for Women in IT. And we're working with a lot of girls, and these are women of all races, Black, Hispanic, white, Indian, Asian, Chinese, and these are really first-rate young women. Some are in the programs, others are affiliates, they all CWITs. And they do two things. They're in engineering or they're in IT, but they also become ambassadors. And many are getting involved. Game development, for those of you over 50, is a really serious academic discipline. We became serious when faculty went out to the University of Southern California. And you really got a sense of just how serious. In fact, Maryland is now third in the country in the number of game development companies. Many up in my area in Hunt Valley. And many of them are my UMBC graduates. And why am I telling you that? So last year, UMBC got to the Final Four in game development. Now, if we were in California, you all would be applauding right now. But you're so 20th century, you don't even appreciate it. And you all are Howard County. That's a disgust. Applaud! That's a big deal! Show you what a big deal it is. Microsoft flew the team out to San Francisco to compete. If they had won, they would have gone to Europe to compete. There's a worldwide competition. Other countries are really hot in these areas. And the other big deal is this, about diversity. All the other teams were all white guys. Our team had a Black, an Asian, a white, and a Hispanic. 2 men, 2 women, and it was a big deal. So we need more efforts involving particularly games for girls. We're working on games for girls. They need games where they can learn the coding. NSA, I want to say this, and I really mean this, NSA is far more enlightened than many universities I know when it comes to diversity. They are really working with us to produce more African American people from different groups, African Americans, Hispanics, women. They really are. I'm very proud of what they're doing because a lot of our students are from military families and are interested in the intelligence community. And so from high school students who get security clearances through our students. We have 1,000 graduates in NSA. And we've got NSA on campus. You know, and I always say to people, these people are defending our country. Give them a round of applause, please. I'm very proud of them. But they're really working with us to produce more students at all levels, undergrad through PhD. Big deal. Another company that's really making a big difference is Northrop Grumman. Very proud of them. They've given us millions of dollars to produce women cyber scholars and minority cyber scholars. And they went after their head of cybersecurity, young Black woman from my alma mater from Hampton. I was very proud of her. Big deal. But they also gave us money to work with Lincoln Elementary to produce more children, Black children, who can have the background to be able to one day get into it. So they're working on both ends, from pre-K all the way up and at the college level. And we need those kinds of initiatives from companies and universities working with school systems and communities on it. But if I had my wish, I'd have every community focused on more reading skills for children, reading and writing and thinking skills. Give me a hand for that. And then on understanding more about culture and the culture of different races. I think it is important. African American history is American history. Thank you very much. We know how we are. But to learn about the cultures of different groups and how we have come together, you see? To respect every culture. It's important to respect every culture and to understand those challenges. But also, you know, in my own state, to be honest with you, the business community, white guys, invited me back to Birmingham to try to convince the teachers to put the Children's March in the Alabama history books. It's still not there. It's still not there. These are the challenges we face in America. I'm going back there next week. I mean, how would you not? And they're saying, well, won't that make the kids bitter? No, no. If you don't know your history, what are we saying? I mean, who are you? Right? So learning history, and I'm saying as a math person, the child who can read well can then be taught to solve word problems. Give me a child who can read well, and I can work with her on math word problems in physics, in chemistry, you see, and to talk about it and think about it. It's very important to do that. Next question. Anybody? Yes, here, and then we're coming back.
Good evening. My name is Janae Barr, and I have a two-parter for you.
Okay.
I work in the STEAM sector, by the way.
Okay.
And the first question I want to ask you about is mentoring and the importance of mentoring, not only from parents, but from the community, etc.
Yes, yes. The mentoring part is so critical, and the point I have to make, it's good for people to see people like themselves, but anybody can serve as a great mentor. It is the heart of the person that counts. It's so important to say that. We need mentors from every community, African Americans and others, but any person with the right attitude and an openness to helping that child can make a difference. We supervise 500 first-time offenders, little boys mainly, of color, mainly black, some Hispanic, some poor white boys, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and been doing it 25 years. All right? And my students of all races work with those children. And you know what they end up saying to students? And these students are from Howard County, Anne Arundel, they end up saying after they get to know the child who starts off being a little mean boy, right? They end up saying, he's just like me. He just didn't have a daddy, or he didn't have somebody who really loved him, but he's really smart, and once he knows you're gonna be around, he starts to trust you, and you see that connecting, you see? So we do need the mentoring at every level, really, it's very important, critical, yes. And I will tell you one other thing, going back to something Charlie was talking about in terms of 55 years, we have a number of students who work in our aging services program, who work at places like Charlestown Retirement Community, and what the students tell me, many of them are gonna work in senior housing, but many of them end up telling me they've got an 80-year-old who's a mentor to them. The intergenerational communication, we need much more intergenerational communication. There's so much that somebody over 65 or 70 has to offer to someone that we need to focus on.
Okay, and the second part of my question deals with...
She's good, didn't she?
Yeah. Okay, for those folk who don't know, there's this new sector. It's STEM plus the arts, called STEAM.
Yeah, yes.
And I want you to speak on the importance of that as well.
Very important. We have a lot of examples of combining the arts and humanities with science and engineering in courses and in work. Just one great example, a new course that combines history and computer science and using game development and the arts. We have developed a game for the War of 1861 on Pratt Street in Baltimore. And it's significant because it's right around the area where part of the Freddie Gray situation occurred, but this is from 150 years ago. And the history majors, computer science majors, some of the art students work together, and some of the graphic design, and you play the game as you are a fox going through the streets of Baltimore, okay? And it uses technology. It's the history from the War of 1861, uses graphic design, all right? And it is developed in such a way that teachers can use it with high school students, which is really fascinating. It's an example of STEAM. Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Rabowski. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much. Your words have been very inspirational and very timely. You mentioned both that UMBC started in 1966, that Columbia started about the same time. Well, it's also the first year that the schools in Anne Arundel County, Howard County, and maybe other counties in Maryland became integrated.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge evolution in the school system. And I look around the room tonight, and I would hesitate to guess that it would be very difficult to assemble this kind of a group 50 years ago.
No.
And so Columbia has stood for diversity for much of that 50 years. But one of the questions I have for you is this. We are grappling with the achievement gap in Howard County. And maybe some of your words, I think, can inferentially, we can address that issue, but maybe you can hit it head on and give us some good ideas about the achievement gap.
Sure. And I work a lot with systems on achievement gap. There's several things and I work a lot on standardized testing. We have to help people understand standardized tests are going to be here. When somebody comes to me and says, I want to be a physician, but I don't like standardized tests, or I don't like chemistry, we got a problem. Because if I'm on the operating table, and the doctor comes in and says, I can't pass the test, but I like people, I'm going to cut on you. I don't think so. Finally, either you know it or you don't, okay? Now, we have to teach people the critical thinking skills. We want them to also be able to write, obviously, and do essays and those kinds of things. But there is no doubt, we can tell you through analytics the minimum level of score somebody needs to be able to have a reasonable chance of succeeding. There's a range. They're not perfect. There's a range in math, a range in reading, and it depends on whether you've had test preparation, because that takes your score up. Remember, I wrote these questions for years, and what I would say is that in terms of the achievement gap in anything in these areas, from the police to the fire department to med school to law, it's a major part of it will be reading skills. Reading skills. The better the child reads, the better she will do on standardized tests. If she has an opportunity to practice. Now people say, oh, you're teaching to the test. No, you're only teaching to the test if you get 10 problems and you work on those 10 problems and you have the same 10 problems on the test. You get my point? If you're a math science person, but if you're just a general person in the room, listen to this. If I have 5 types of problems, and I teach you how to solve the 5 types of problems, and then you have those types of problems on the test, that is not teaching to the test. If I have 3 types of essays, where you learn how to read the passage first, so you know what you are, or read the questions first, so you know what you're looking for. And then you begin reading, well, that was a question there, right? You're learning techniques that you can use, and then if you have somebody to really work with you on critical reading skills, whether it's interpretation, it's synthesis, whatever it is, and you get a chance to answer and then discuss your answers when you're wrong, to debate about it and that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with it. But what it does is to strengthen the thinking skills. And you learn to do by doing. I would argue that our children need many more opportunities to do several things. One, to have after-school work, because well-educated homes have students working in the evenings and in the summertime, all kinds of rich experiences, reading more books. My mother had me reading Dostoevsky in middle school because she knew the world wasn't going to be fair, and she wanted me to know who Raskolnikov was. You get my point? But she also wanted me to know who Bigger was, right? And Mr. Bledsoe. So from the Harlem Renaissance to Russian literature, she wanted me to know, and she had been a child maid learning to read from a rich white woman. And she wanted better for me. Do you get my point? Knowing one's history makes the difference. And the reading made the difference for me. I tell my students, a lot of my, because I get goosebumps doing math. I'm a mathematician. But I say this, but I'm still studying T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I love it. I refuse to look at some synopsis. I want to keep struggling with it. You get my point? And we have to teach children that which is worth having requires effort. What I see from other countries, whether it's Nigeria or India or Barbados or wherever it is this hunger. It's this hunger for being the best. This is what we're working on at UMBC, the grit and this hunger. It's what I sometimes say, we had in Alabama, another country. You knew you had to be twice as good. You could not be satisfied, right? Now, here's the point. For my kids out of the city and some kids here, some children don't have anybody at home to help them out for a lot of reasons, or don't know what to do. We need the kinds of programs that will supplement what the child will get, because otherwise the child is falling further behind, because Howard County particularly, which has so many people with graduate degrees, right, has the best in the world. So we really, and not just in terms of skills, not in terms of degrees, but in terms of hunger. So what does that mean? It means that it's an opportunity in the mentoring to work with children and parents to help them to build their skills and to see just how hard the best work. We don't like to show people sometimes how hard we work. When I teach at Harvard throughout the year, new presidents and others. And at the Ivies, you notice that people are very privileged and very, very talented. There's no doubt about that. A lot of kids may not make it in science. That's one of the challenges in America, that at the Ivies, kids often don't make it in science if their parents are not from another country. But there's the focus on the ideas, which is wonderful, which we have. The difference for us is we encourage students to talk about just how hard they worked. In universities, usually, people like to say, oh, it's okay, I'm not putting in much time. Then they go back and kill themselves. But they don't want to tell anybody. You get what I'm saying? That's bad. That's very bad. We need to teach students two things. You need help. It always helps when you work with other people. Number two, it's wonderful when you say, I've been working so hard. There's no such thing as work that's too hard. Did you get that? I mean, people think I'm crazy as when I say it. I tell my students, I don't just want you to get an A, I want you to get a high A. Did you hear that? I want you not to be going, I got an A. I want you to dare to know, they call it. You get my point? Beyond grades, just dare to know. And I'm saying we've got to work to have that kind of culture for every student. The way we do for basketball. Give me a round of applause for that. Final question? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Last call. Go ahead.
Alan Klein, I'm on the board of directors of CA, so thank you for coming. The question is a little bit different. You talked about not letting people define us. And yet we have a culture that all too often does define. So specifically, as an example, we have a president who one could look at and say, he's as white as he is black, in terms of white mother, black father. And yet our culture has him be black. And so my question to you is... He's my friend, and he looks quite African to me. He's got a big nose. And so my question to you is, what's the meaning you make of that, and what's the impact of that meaning on you? Well, you know, I'm very serious. I mean, I think that he is with white and black, but he's not a typical person with that background. You know exactly what he is, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that in a very positive way. It's not like he's somebody trying to pass or something. He is an African American, and we are all, most blacks come from mixture. That is the history of our country and our race. My great-great-grandfather was Polish, but that meant he took my great-grandmother. I mean, he did. It was awful. But the complexity is that they were also very good to their mulatto children. And my daddy looked like he was from another country. And then he married a beautiful chocolate woman, and here I am. All right? And on the other side, you know, I've got the Cherokee Indian and all that. So we have mixed, all of us have these mixtures. But we were told forever, if you have, what is it, you're black. All right? Now, what does that mean? It does mean, unfortunately, I get your point. What I'm saying is, I think there's something wonderful to be said about appreciating one's background, whatever it is. Columbia, because you were one of the few places where people could marry interracial marriages, my campus was the beneficiary. So we've always had large numbers of students who have parents from different races. In my books, even, you'll see. Large, and where parents really talk with their children about that. I've had white mothers and white fathers say to their sons, you have me and you, and yet the world will see you as a black man. Don't get confused about that. You get my point? Just because they want to protect them, right? Fortify them, right? Which I think is very important. Soledad, you know, Soledad O'Brien, her parents were of mixed race, and this was the only place where they could be. They were grad students at Hopkins, same thing. So my point is, people will define us all based on their own prejudices in our country. They will. But I do believe this, I really do, that people can get to know each other well enough that you get beyond much of it. Much of it. My campus has done a wonderful job of supporting me. When I first became president, there were those black who said, he won't last. There were those white who said, he won't last. Well, 25 years later, they said, maybe he'll last.
We stand right now, compared to, in my last 43 years I've lived here, I felt proud of being an American and an immigrant, having a kind of a different cultural background. What I see is, I am kind of disappointed. I want to know, where do you think country is going in terms of all this, you being a person of national perspective as well as international perspective. I want to know, where do you think we're headed?
It's a great question. It really is a great question. It really is. First of all, it's very clear that the Republican Party is very divided right now. I have many friends who are Republicans who are not very happy at all right now. Secondly, you brought up a kind of religion of diversity that I should mention anyway, religious diversity. You know, Vartan Gregorian, who came to this country and went on to become president of Brown and then of the Mellon Foundation, was asked the question, if there were one course that every American should take in the general education program, what would it be? What do you think he said? Comparative religion. Comparative religion, which I thought was a wonderful answer. That we know so little about other cultures based on religion. I just had an amazing experience on my campus. I want to get you an amazing experience on my campus. We made a mistake. We have all religions, as you might expect, and we made a mistake, and somebody thought they had consulted appropriately with somebody who supposedly knew something about Islam, and they put down a brick that could be interpreted with the word Allah in it, meaning that people would be walking on that. And the organization, the Muslim Student Association, wrote me the most wonderful letter immediately, saying, Dr. Brodsky, we know you didn't know this was happening. And while there are those who want to have a protest immediately, we just believe you would not want this to be the case. We know it's expensive to change it. What can you do? Well, I got it to my people, and within hours, they had torn up that brick and got it out. It turns out it was the women who were the leaders of the group. The guys wanted to fight first, all right? Not always, you know how we guys are, right? And the women made the guys come to apologize to me when they came to say, you see, we told you he'd be nice about it, right? It was wonderful. It was just great. And they brought a revolving globe to say, we appreciate the respect you give as a university to those of us on this campus who are Muslim. And I said, give me a chance to come and speak to your group. And I did last week. And I also use it as one of those moments for teaching the rest of the campus. That sometimes when you have a disagreement or something happens, see if people are willing to understand the mistake and correct it. Whatever the mistake is, whether it's about an official or about something like that. And the fact is that we've got large numbers of people of Muslim faith there. And what they didn't know was that I had spent my wife now, my girlfriend then, my wife, and I spent half a year in Egypt and studied Islam and Arab society and have spent time in Israel. And so I could talk about those religions. And we had the most amazing conversation with, as you in a faith place on campus, with, I don't know, almost 100 women who were of diverse cultures, even within Islam. I mean, from African countries, Middle East, all kinds of places, and then the guys on the other side. And it was fascinating. And they asked two questions. One was, what do we do to get so many Americans from looking like they're afraid of us when we have on something that shows culturally that we're from that part of the country? And how do you respond when somebody comes at you that way? And number two, they asked what did I think was going to happen to the question you asked. When there are people who are insulting them, their religion, they are Americans, right? And I said this, we've always had extremists who can get to a point in our country, but I do have the faith that we come back to a point of reason. I really do. Not only among people in one party, but there are enough people in both parties who understand that we must be able to have somebody who can represent us, not only in this country, but in the rest of the world. I really have that faith. I'm a strong believer in faith. Believe me, all right? And I would tell people, I may be Christian, but I respect other faiths, and I'm saying all of us should be praying for the word, inshallah. But let me tell you, because believe me, and I do believe, that we will. No. We are too great a country to not have someone with some integrity and who understands the complexity of the presidency. I am around him. He is, whether you like the man or not, Mr. Obama, President Obama he struggles with these issues. Anybody who's glibly able to say, this is good, you ought to be afraid of it. Because all these issues, whether it's race or immigration, they're hard issues. Good thinkers struggle with the issues. I'm going to leave you with a quote that CDRs heard before, because everybody on campus knows I'm studying French right now. My wife and I are studying French. We read German in high school, in college rather. And what really got me going, Charlie, was when the student said a year ago, Doc, don't you think you're too old to learn a language? I said, okay, bring it on. Bring it on. Okay, all right, that's all I need to hear, right? Bring it on, all right? So I started about a year ago, and Jacqueline, ma femme Jacqueline et moi, nous étudions le français maintenant. Jacqueline et moi, nous avons passé du temps à Paris en août dernier pour notre anniversaire de mariage. And I want to leave you with a quote. So, j'étudie chaque jour, tous les jours. J'étudie le plus qu'on parfait. Okay. All right, the long parfait. Right? So, and my professor est un étudiant doctoral à Iowa Mason. He's a doctoral student there, right? And il est originaire de Normandie. And mon petit Dijon et moi, nous parlons le français tous les jours. Now, here's the quote that I'll leave you with. It's from the poet Apollinaire, who said, La joie venait toujours après la peine. La joie venait toujours après la peine. What does it mean? The joy comes after the struggle. That nothing comes without that struggle. Now, my students responded by saying, Doc, you didn't have to say all that. All you had to say was, no pain. No pain. I said, but I sounded better saying what I said. Thank you all.